Kingdom Hearts 2 has a bad reputation. The meme is that it's just a game where the experience consists of mashing the X button, and sometimes mashing square. So what happens if you don't use this core combo system people argue breaks the game? As I illustrated in my Kingdom Hearts 3 review, I've played through Kingdom Hearts 2 at least a dozen times in my life thus far. Tons of times as a teenager when it first released, and then 4 previous times in the last 3 years. Once on Critical on the PS3 where I got the Platinum, once on Beginner just for fun, yet another time on Critical, this time getting the Platinum trophy on the PS4, and once on Critical Level 1. Not that any of this makes me special. Plenty of people have done this stuff and are much better at the game to boot. But it does mean I'm at least skilled enough to hopefully try other forms of self-imposed challenges. So I figured, since the current YouTube craze is all about self-imposed challenge videos, popularized by channels like GameChamp3000 and Sieve Gaming, I could try the same thing with Kingdom Hearts 2. As far as I could find, there's only one other video like this for KH2, where Skyward Wing completed the game on critical mode without jumping. It's a great video, by the way, so definitely check it out if it sparks your interest. So, in the spirit of these sorts of videos, today we ask the question, can you beat Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix without using Keyblade combos? So, a few rules before we begin. 1. As one would expect, we're playing the game on critical mode. This means we take much more damage than on standard, but have half the total HP that we'd get on proud. 2. We're not counting the Roxas prologue, because if we did, the challenge would be over before the first combat tutorial was even over. 3. As penalty for the above rule, I'm using the no experience ability until I gain control of Sora. 4. Now we get to the specifics. Firstly, no swinging your Keyblade using the X button, or using combo modifiers with square. This also includes retaliating slash. Any action where a Keyblade swings itself is okay as long as the Keyblade doesn't hit an enemy, and the Keyblade swing isn't the main part of the attack. 5. Reaction commands are the exception, because otherwise things like Rock Shatter would make the challenge impossible, and also because they're not specifically tied to Keyblade attacks. Plus, with a lot of them, it's really difficult to tell whether the attack is specifically done with the Keyblade or not. So to make it less complicated so that I don't have to go frame by frame on every reaction command just to make sure before I even do the challenge, we'll just say all reaction commands are allowed. 6. Blocking is allowed since the intention is defensive and it can't deal damage, though counter abilities tied to blocking aren't allowed. 7. Sora's part in limits is allowed as long as he's not alone like in Solo Trinity, and as long as he's doing special attacks. In any limit where the player can just freely combo using the normal combos, like Duck Flare, we're only allowed to use the actual limit attacks. 8. Drive form Keyblade swings aren't allowed either. I decided this includes firing magic bolts in Wisdom form, since they're Wisdom's direct replacement for attack. Not that this made any difference, as you'll see. 9. Mickey is not allowed to save us. And 10. This isn't necessarily a rule so much as a note. I chose to go with the rod for the bonus magic, but picked up the shield for ability layout. This is a case where I felt that getting second chance at level 49 rather than 65 was going to be more beneficial overall, assuming we get to level 49 anyway. In order to keep this video as far under feature film length as possible, I won't go through every forced fight, only the interesting ones. Still, buckle up for a long one, because I couldn't shorten the video more than this. With that out of the way, let's get started. Once we finally gain control of Sora, our first fight is won with a series of nobodies at the train station entrance in Twilight Town. Luckily, in the first few fights we have Donald and Goofy with us. This means we're free to run around avoiding damage, while they kill our enemies for some free experience. Though, Even if we were by ourselves, this fight is one of many that doesn't need to be won. If Sora takes too much damage, the fight will simply end, and the game will carry on. The same tactic works for the forced fights when climbing Yensid's tower, though here we can at least help with any Soldier Heartless that show up, since they'll offer up the deadly Cyclone reaction command. It's after this that we get our first real combat option, is what you might think, until you realize that Valor form can't use anything but Keyblade attacks. It's worth noting that this also means we can't get high jump either, since the only way to level up Valor form is by hitting living things with your Keyblade while in said form. And, to add just a bit more salt to the wound, that means we can't get combo plus from it either, meaning our magic combo is stuck to 3 hits and 2 finishers. Saddened but still determined, we move on. After this, we don't have another fight until we reach Hollow Bastion, the first of which is yet another skirmish against nobodies, and once more Donald and Goofy can gather up some free experience for us until the fight ends, or we die, which will continue the story. Finally, we see our first real combat option, Blizzard, and luckily it's right before our first forced fight, where we aren't likely to succeed just by watching our allies attack. This bit where you're defending the gate with Leon is one that generally sees people struggling for the first time when they initially play critical mode. The samurai nobodies here can decimate you if you're not careful, and our only option for healing is going to be the 2 item slots we have for potions. What I found worked best was to position myself on the side of the gate, once a handful of nobodies have gathered, then use Blizzard to destroy the lot of them. Once the samurai appear, we need to focus on blocking them so we can use the dual stance reaction command. Hopefully, Leon will at least distract the other nobodies from destroying the gate. We can fairly consistently rely on him to chip away at them with the help of the security system, and whenever we're free from the samurai, it's not a bad idea to use reversal on the Dusks so that we can limit their damage output to the gate. With a fair amount of skill, careful planning, and just a bit of luck, we have this fight done in no time. And in success, we find our second combat option already, Fire. Understanding how to use Fire and Blizzard will be rather important going forward. We need to remember that Blizzard pierces through enemies but costs more MP. Meanwhile, Fire can sometimes knock enemies into the air, meaning we can infinitely juggle them to death if we cancel Fire combos before we reach the finisher, which would normally knock them away. These will largely be our only combat options for a while. And boy, does it feel like a long while. The first Disney World we'll be stopping by is Land of Dragons. Almost immediately we end up in a fight with some Heartless in the camp. Luckily, this fight isn't too bad. Unluckily, you'll likely notice 2 problems we're going to face for the first half of this world: the morale meter and ping. Ping is not Mulan. Mulan is useful. Ping is awful. Since we're still going to be relying on our party members for a while we're out of MP, it's important that they can put up a fight. Ping has basically no combat options, and as such likes to just sort of stand around. The other issue is the morale meter, which drains over time. Grabbing orbs refills it, but if it empties completely, we lose. As I said though, we'll be doing a lot of waiting for MP to charge here if we don't want to grind for dozens of ethers to spam, so it's important to manipulate our allies into attacking enemies. This first bit is just a handful of shadows and 2 Nightwalkers. Nightwalkers are dangerous, extremely dangerous, since once they start an attack animation, Fire won't cancel it, and to succeed before we run out of morale in some of these fights, we need to be able to hit more than 1 Nightwalker at once, which is much easier with Fire than Blizzard. Still, this fight sees the morale meter falling rather slowly as long as we don't get hit, so our best option is to take it slow too. Luckily, they chose to focus on Ping even after she was knocked out, so MP charge was a cake for me. Next up are the 3 trial fights, which can be done in any order. The surprise attack mission takes place in the screen over, which is a fairly open area. This gives you plenty of room to avoid taking damage. There are 15 Heartless in all that you have to defeat, including several more Nightwalkers. This fight can be a challenge, but as with the last one, not getting hit can allow the morale meter to sustain for quite a while. I tried to capitalize on moments where my allies got in good attacks by rushing in with magic combos. Otherwise, the only other major help in this battle are the carts and fireworks nearby, which can explode for massive damage against our enemies if we play our cards right. It's not easy, but eventually we prevail, and the second mission, the ambush, begins. This is much the same as the previous, but with harder enemies, or at least they would be harder enemies if we were reckless. Assault riders prey on players who love to get too close. They're not the easiest enemies to stagger, and they can dish out a lot of damage really quickly. Luckily, we have Blizzard, and no reason to go anywhere near them. This means they're extremely easy to dodge, so this more or less is an easier version of the previous mission. Speedrunning the game, we are not. The final mission, the search, is potentially the most difficult. It mirrors the first fight, but with stricter time on the morale meter, and a more frustrating relationship between ally AI and enemy spawns. This time we have to find the handful of Heartless that are hiding around the camp. They will always spawn in the same spots, and always in the same order as far as I experienced. However, since they spawn all across the camp, it's difficult to keep your allies from getting stuck on all of the tents set up everywhere. It wasn't uncommon for me to find that Donald or Ping ended up halfway across the arena, continually failing to jump over a tent that they can clear 2 times over. I can't really explain what the proper movements are to get them to avoid getting stuck, but if you're careful, it can be done. We can try to destroy tents with fire combos, but to make it on time would require wasting ethers, which isn't worth it yet. Other than that, it's another fight where we simply have to avoid getting hit. I found that the shadows can be a bit tricky here. They love to sneak back into the ground right before you hit them with a spell, and even just 1 extra MP charge means the mission becomes impossible without ethers. After this is a short trek up the mountain. The morale meter is here as well, but it's hardly a problem since we can skip most of the enemies. I only engaged them when I was afraid they'd knock me out of Rock Shatter. If you spawn a few of them before you get to the final rock wall, the assault rider that would normally spawn here won't, so we're free to escape with minimal issue. Further up ahead is yet another room that normally gives players a bit of trouble, but since we don't have the morale meter to contend with this time, we can play this more careful. When safe, I spammed fire combos on the shadows, and blizzard combos from afar on the assault riders. Easy peasy. At the top of the mountain is a timed survival against tons of rapid thrusters and bolt towers. Speed trap for the easy win. After this, we finally gain access to Mulan and her powerful fire-based attacks, including the Red Rocket Limit command. The final battle before the fight with Shan Yu is at the entrance of the palace, all the way back down the mountain. A few Nightwalkers perfectly positioned to be fired to death, and some more bolt towers make for a quick victory. At last we're at the world boss, Shan Yu. I personally found this battle shockingly difficult at level 1, but here it wasn't so bad. The biggest annoyance is his bird, which is really difficult to avoid if you're focused on other things. Yet another gate is under siege, but this one is so easy to defend that we don't even really need to pay it any mind. I just occasionally dropped by and picked up any morale orbs lying near it to recharge the meter. Shan Yu himself doesn't put up much of a challenge. At the beginning of the battle, I spammed Blizzard until just about out of MP. I then would enter the Red Rocket command and enjoy the free damage. This is more or less the cycle of the fight. I focused on staying safe well on MP charge, but if you want to be more proactive, you can try to bait out sword slashes from Shan Yu. Blocking these will always enter you into a struggle reaction command that gives you some free damage when you succeed. This is also the main way to deal with his darkness attacks, where he powers up and then zooms across the screen toward you. Just be careful, because missing any of these blocks will lead to a ton of damage, and likely death. Beast's Castle is the first real challenge we face, and for a while, it'll only get more difficult. Smart people will equip the hidden dragon Keyblade, by the way, which we got from the last world, since its MP rage ability will be invaluable for pretty much the whole run. Anyway, the first fight here isn't worth saying much about, it's just a lot of shadows. Win or lose, the game goes on. After these comes the battle with the Thresholder. This fight will be over in 2 phases no matter what. Making it past the second phase will be the hard part. At the beginning, we are immediately assaulted by 2 giant fists. Block and then move out of range. Once the attack is over, we rush in, where 2 gargoyle warriors will spring to life. Run back to the safe end of the room as soon as this happens. Defeating these statues isn't difficult, but it is somewhat luck-based. They're immune to magic as far as I can tell, so our only option to defeat them is a special stagger state they enter if we block the correct attacks. For the sword variant, most of his attacks work. For the axe version, I could only get him to stagger correctly if I blocked his spin attack. Doing so will freeze the statue in a stunned state for a few seconds, at which point we can simply run up and use the release reaction command to instantly relieve them of their possession. Now onto the fight itself. The first phase is total cake, since the Thresholder will only use one attack if we stay far enough away. Since this can't hit us, we're free to spam blizzard combos from the opposite end of the room. After 2 full bars of MP or so, his life will deplete. Now we jump in and release the Possessor from the door. This enemy doesn't actually do anything, instead it just floats around trying to avoid us. My first time I spent quite a lot of time with it just flying about, so I don't think it goes back into the door until you've taken off at least half of its health. Knowing this, we can wait for the hook bats that spawn when we get close to the Thresholder to begin an attack. They'll occasionally offer up the Bat Cry reaction command, which can do huge amounts of damage to the Possessor. 2 bat cries or so and it'll retreat to the door. Here's where things get difficult. At this point, the Thresholder loves to repeatedly spawn darkness orbs that stalk us, and will send us into critical health from full health. Therefore, we need to block pretty precisely here. We can also use the safety of Bat Cry, which can block the orbs outright, but getting the command to show up at the right time is luck. This fight was the first real challenge. It took me a while and probably 24 tries. Torturous when you consider that the first phase is about 2 minutes of nothing dangerous happening. Eventually I was able to block just enough dark orbs, get just enough bat cries off, and even use a few blizzards to make it back to the Possessor phase. At this point I half expected it to have some new attacks I'd never given it the chance to do before. But it still just floats around helplessly, ripe for the slapping. An hour after we started, and we're only halfway through this world. The next area is the torch cleansing minigame, which was more about wasted time because I poorly used my magic a few times and had to go into MP charge. Then, we need to cleanse the Beast of his darkness. Cogsworth and Sora can fairly consistently stagger Beast using the charge reaction command. After that, it's just about spamming Blizzard at safe moments. At last, we reach Shadowstalker and Darkthorn. Shadowstalker is cake. If you know the attacks it can do and the pattern it uses, it'll never be a threat. However, doing this fight incorrectly will set us up for failure against Darkthorn. You see, at least with how I was leveled at the time, I was doing just the right amount of damage to consistently run out of MP on my last Blizzard cast against Shadowstalker. This carries into the Darkthorn battle, meaning we have no offensive moves for a good 30 seconds. Therefore, no matter what else we do, we have to make sure we have at least a single MP left when going into Darkthorn. In doing this, our first action against Darkthorn is to use Beast's Twin Howl limit. This does a decent chunk of damage, makes us invulnerable for a while, and leaves Darkthorn open to the Step Vault series of reaction commands, which will render him visible. From here, he was much easier to block since I don't have his patterns memorized. Important, since blocking was most of the fight. Once I got my MP back, I tried to throw any safe blizzards at him I was brave enough for, but eventually it would always get too dangerous and I'd immediately have to drop back into Twin Howl again. This fight isn't as hard as the Thresholder, but it stings more since instead of a 2-minute wait, we now have a 4-minute fight with Shadowstalker waiting for us each time we fail. Beating this fight gets us Cure. It also gives Sora Retaliating Slash, which as stated at the top, we can't use, so leave it unequipped just like all of our other combo options. Welcome to one of the hardest parts of the run. Firstly, we stop by Merlin's place in Hollow Bastion to get one of our best early options, Chicken Little. Now, we cry in despair at the realization that Olympus is next, so we can't use him for the vast majority of the world. Since our drive gauge is locked out until we get the Olympus Stone from Demyx, we're still stuck to only using Fire and Blizzard again. Plus, Cure is mostly useless as well, since using it eliminates both of our attack options. Fun times! First up is the Hades escape section, which was just as torturous here as it is in a level 1 run. So difficult in fact that after about 24 tries, I left the world and bought 2 Abass chains. Just those 2 extra points of defense they gave helped a ton, but the fire resistance also made it far less common that Hades' attempts to gank us would actually end in a retry. So how did this series of mob fights play out? The first fight was simple: avoid doing anything stupid and exploit Batcry. Take this part slow, and we won't even take any damage nor expend any MP. The second fight is significantly more difficult. It's tempting to use Bushido, Orin's limit, but it just didn't do enough damage to justify the resulting MP charge. Orin is better as a distraction anyway, so that we can hopefully line up the enemies for a good bit of blizzard action, or wait for one of the Lance soldiers to open up to the Lance Tug reaction command. Lance Tug doesn't do a ton of damage, but it's certainly better than being vulnerable back on the ground. Lance soldiers are one of the few enemies in this game that I feel are kind of cheap, since their stumbling attacks can sometimes come out of nowhere, something we can deal with easily later on, but right now we simply don't have the options to do so, and blocking needlessly in anticipation can leave us open to other attacks like Hades' fireballs. Get past this second fight and the final one is more of the same, only double the Lance soldiers and even a large body thrown into the mix. I only got to this part like 3 times before I finished it, and even then, getting through this fight is a blur. I can't really tell you what I did other than more of the same as before. Cerberus is next. Cerberus is dead. That's how easy this fight was. Just stay away from him. I didn't even try for his reaction command. It's not worth it. He becomes a fairly good doggo if we just keep our distance. He'll focus on firing easy to block fireballs and more or less just do nothing else. Whenever our MP is full, we can jump blizzard spam until we're about to run out, and then use Bushido. First try for the win. And for that win, we get counter guard. Useless. Moving on. In order to keep with the theme of this video, I also did the next part without using my Keyblade to attack, and I am almost certain that the Maniac training with Phil is impossible in this challenge without spamming ethers. Only finishers break the urns. We have 1:30 to collect 100 orbs from these broken urns. The urns float around fairly randomly, although they do seem to follow the player a bit, so we can kind of get them to bunch up. Every time we destroy urns, about 10 seconds later, the same amount of urns will respawn in a bunch somewhere in the arena. And destroying enough urns will cause a large one to spawn, which will drop large orbs worth 10 points instead of 1. With all of this in mind, the only way through is to line up the urns as best as we can and spam Blizzard through them. If one is too close to us, Sora loves to target it even without magic lock-on equipped, causing us to miss the bunch we're aiming at and just hit the 1 or 2 urns. If we miss even one spell, the attempt is likely over. By the end of our first MP bar, we need to have at least 30-ish orbs already. If we don't use an ether, we're waiting and then repeating. However, after that we still won't have enough points, meaning we'll more or less have to use an ether. Honestly, it's probably smarter to use the ethers before you run out of MP, since using them in MP charge doesn't immediately fill your MP, but using them with MP still remaining does. However, this means you're getting one less spell finisher out, and remember, spell finishers are the only way we can break the urns. On top of this, failing the training will eat any ethers we used, so it's important to save beforehand in case we fail. For this, we get Aerial Dive. Also useless. Moving on. Demyx is next, and he's just as cake as usual. However, success gives us the Olympus Stone, and finally allows us to use Chicken Little. As we enter the fight with Pete, we need to resist the urge to open up a can of chicken just yet. Chicken Little won't last through the full version of the battle if we use him now. This is nothing but a warm-up, so we can just bat-cry Pete into oblivion. Once into the part of the fight with Hercules by our side, we can call upon our poultry overlord and waste a punk. Pete can be a little dangerous, especially since he has Trick Ghost Heartless with him, but taking them out using Chicken Little's magnet ability is simple. After that, we play it safe, use spells on Pete when we can, look for the pinball reaction command if it shows up, and reflect his large bowling ball bombs back at him. For winning this fight, we get Trinity limits, something I didn't notice until a bit later. As such, I didn't equip it until after I beat the Hydra, who's up next. Good thing, Hydra's easy. He is a bit dangerous though, largely because of his dark orbs he can spawn, but they're consistent to block. So as soon as the battle starts, we need to jump over his tail and watch Donald and Goofy damage boost like champs. Then we quickly run into the corner. What we're waiting for is the Hydra to drop his head down and look around. When doing this, we can either do like I did and use jumping blizzards to chip damage him, or you could probably use Trinity Limit to actually hurt him good. Regardless, doing enough damage will allow us to decapitate him. He'll then shove his neck into the ground and spawn more heads. Dealing with this is easy, but requires more timing than usual. I didn't know until doing this run, but taking too long to cut off all the heads will lead to the Hydra spawning more. So we have to effectively whittle the heads down fast enough so that MP charge doesn't endlessly cause more to show back up. It's not too difficult, especially with "Get up on the Hydra's back!" Yeah, that. But it's worth noting regardless. After this, it's all about waiting safely in the corner again. Block orbs, use Blizzard or Trinity, and wait for the Hydra to slam his mini faces on the ground. Not long after, he'll offer up the Pegasus Run reaction command, which is the best way to deal damage in the later part of the fight. A few of these and he's down for the count. World complete, and a new spell in the form of Thunder finally obtained. From here, while things don't necessarily get easy, we've at least got enough options in our arsenal of abilities that they will get easier. Disney Castle is up next, and it's so simple that we hardly need to even use any of our ability options. There are only 2 segments here that we have to do, which consist of moving Minnie Mouse through the castle safely. The hallway is probably the more complicated of the 2, thanks to the minute bombs. Generally, spamming Faith with Minnie wasn't quite enough to kill them outright for me, but since it launches them so far away, they just end up despawning and respawning with full health. Therefore, I either had to get some fire spells off of them first and then use Faith, or use fire and then activate their dodge roll reaction command to finish them for good. The throne room, meanwhile, is absolutely full of bolt towers. That means it's cake. Spam Faith and coax Minnie through the room at a brisk pace. Timeless River ramps up the challenge yet again, though it's more so difficult if you're looking to avoid grinding your drive gauge back to full. Our first fight in Timeless River is against Retro Pete, who can only do damage to us by accident. He's extremely easy even here, though he took a few minutes since I was conserving ethers. After this are the 4 gates where we need to help Retro Mickey. Each has a mayhem meter, which if it gets maxed out, you lose. The first one I chose to do was the construction site elevator. Each time an elevator rope breaks, Sora and the enemies are launched into the air several times, and the mayhem meter increases. While this is happening, we have access to the extremely powerful air slash reaction command though, which makes short work of our enemies. We initially need to use Chicken Little to magnet the enemies toward us, then use fire until most of the hammer frames are dealt with. We need to be careful though, since after a while, minute bombs will start spawning in, and if we hit them with fire, they'll enter their self-destruct countdown. If a rope breaks while they're counting down, it's really easy to get blown out of the air. If we can avoid that, when a rope breaks, we just use air slash to our advantage whenever it's available. The second door I did was the miniature city. Our goal is to prevent the Heartless from destroying the city. In the center of the arena is a tower that will stagger all of the enemies for several seconds using the Stomp Bomb reaction command. Use it regularly. Use Chicken Little to keep the enemies close, and try to be precise with our spell casts. Things become a lot more difficult once Chicken Little runs out, so we can either use ethers to finish it off before that happens, or make sure to stay next to the tower and spam Stomp Bomb while we're in MP charge. Third is the room with the black hole that sucks in the furniture. This has the shortest time before the mayhem meter fills up, and it's also kind of luck. We need to quickly summon Chicken Little and pray to the Kuko gods that he uses Magnet as much as possible. If he does, we make short work of this room by simply spamming spells and maybe using an ether. If not, we have to hope a speed trap reaction command appears. Otherwise, we have no chance. Still, Chicken Little is consistent enough that this only took a few attempts. Finally is the most dangerous room, which sees us saving a burning building from catching further alight. Every once in a while, living flame enemies will spawn and head toward the building. If they touch it, the mayhem meter increases. However, once again, Chicken Little can use Magnet, which affects these flames as well as the other enemies. No, the difficult part here is instead dealing with the Hot Rod enemies, which are one of the few normal mob monsters that actually have a sort of mini desperation move, similar to what we see in bosses. As their health gets low, they'll rev up, gain a sort of attack reflecting property, and then race around the arena attempting to run Sora over. This does huge amounts of damage, as do all of their attacks, but what's more, they regularly hit Chicken Little as well, which depletes the drive gauge by a fair amount. Therefore, it's once again luck to some extent, hoping that Chicken Little graces us with his magnet. If he does, we're golden, and even if he doesn't, his attacks can break the Hot Rods out of their DM move, unlike your attacks. As long as Chicken Little doesn't go down, this isn't too much trouble, but we have to try to ration our spell and MP usage in such a way that we can use spell combos to take out the Hot Rods from just above their DM health range, so we can avoid the DM. Next is the fight to retake the Cornerstone from Modern Pete, who has stolen Retro Pete's Steamboat and is trying to run off with the Cornerstone. And unfortunately, this fight apparently forces us to use our Keyblade to win. I was sure you could use spells while hanging from the hook, but apparently not. And we can't hit it while on the ground either. Since there's no way to get past this without whacking the cage with the Keyblade, we're gonna have to make a special amendment to the rules. In this specific instance, attacking with the Keyblade using the X button is okay for two reasons. Firstly, we're not attacking an enemy, we're attacking a box. And secondly, attack is swapped out for the hit command, meaning it's technically not the same? Is that good enough? Cool, because otherwise the run ends here, which would be a lame way to end this video. Winning is otherwise easy, and it gives us Donald's Comet Limit, which can prove very useful. The final section of this world is another fight with Modern Pete, which isn't all that different from the previous one in Olympus. The two new gimmicks are that Retro Pete tries to help us, and that Modern Pete will utilize the various gimmicks we saw in the rooms we cleared for Mickey. The first part has no gimmicks. The second has the flame enemies from the burning building, which Pete can summon to do huge damage to us. The third is in the room with the black hole. Here, instead of sucking in furniture, Pete can make the hole suck us toward it, but also it will cause Retro Pete to roll around, potentially doing damage to us. We can use the About Face reaction command to direct him toward his other self, however, which will stagger Modern Pete for quite a while. After this is the miniature town again. I'm not sure if Stomp Bomb works here still, because I honestly didn't need it. And finally, we end up on the construction elevator, which works like it did previously. On top of Air Slash, Retro Pete can end up falling on Modern Pete to stagger him just like he does with the About Face reaction command. This battle can be really simple if we just play it safe. If we keep our distance, Pete loves to just bowl bombs at us forever, while our allies poke at him. Both the bombs when reflected back, and our allies will do chip damage to whittle him down. Meanwhile, our job is to spam blizzard combos until our MP runs out, or fire combos if he's staggered and we can get in close. Chicken Little seems like a good idea at first, but he makes Pete more unpredictable, so it's better to just keep things simple. The only other thing to note is that Pete doesn't randomly change phases at will. He only does so at HP gates, and only when we initiate an attack on him. So, knocking his bombs back at him and ally attacks will not carry the fight forward. And in fact, Pete will also stop taking damage at that point until we attack him ourselves. Luckily, it doesn't have to be a finisher nor a physical attack that hits him, so we just have to be wary of when his health stops going down. With that fight over, we're done with this world. Our rewards are threefold. Firstly, we gain access to the monochrome Keyblade, which can be useful for making better use of ethers when an MP charge. We also finally get the Reflect spell, which will only increase in value as we keep going. And we get Wisdom form. Unlike Valor, Wisdom levels up simply by killing Heartless when in said form. This means we can start leveling it right now to gain access to more MP Rage and our first movement ability, Quick Run, by just spamming spells on Heartless. After a short grind session to level Wisdom form as far as it'll go right now, it's time to enter Port Royal. This world isn't necessarily easy, but luckily its gimmicks are designed just for us. Most of the fights here are with cursed pirates, which are invincible when enshrouded in darkness, but become vulnerable by the light of the moon. And by vulnerable, I mean they become extremely weak to magic. They even have special responses to our spells, freezing in place when we use Blizzard, being paralyzed by thunder, and burning by fire. The first fight is a forced loss, whether we lose most of our health or time out. After that, we fight the pirates for real. At least I thought. I'm pretty sure I lost here, but the game kept going. Whatever, free experience. Further fights won't be though, since the pirates do a ton of damage, and specifically the axe pirates start into attacks extremely quickly, similar to the lance soldiers. The first few fights after this aren't notable in any way. After them is a fight on Isla de Muerta against yet more pirates. These ones are infinite, because the goal is to survive for a certain amount of time. This isn't too difficult as long as we don't get greedy for experience. There are always several pirates out at once, and it's easy for them to catch us by surprise. Chicken Little and a bit of running around should see this go by easily though. Shortly thereafter comes the first forced fight on the ship. Pirates are trying to steal a medallion from us. If one attacks us, they'll grab it, meaning we have to kill that enemy in a certain amount of time or they'll escape with it and we fail. There are a lot of pirates here, meaning multiple MP bars and probably a full use of Chicken Little. Still, by keeping our cool and avoiding the cannon fire coming from the nearby pirate ship, we scrape by. 15 seconds of kicking barrels off of our boat later, and there's only one more encounter we need to take care of. The boss fight with Barbossa. This fight comes with two gimmicks that ratchet up the difficulty. Firstly, Barbossa has a special Heartless with him, which can occasionally darken the arena, find the glowing eyes, and deplete its health to light things back up. The other issue is that the battle is lost immediately if Jack dies. This is the more pressing issue, seeing as the most effective way we have of healing Jack also prevents us from attacking until MP charge is done. Still, Jack is fairly resilient, and we also have a gimmick on our side. Barbossa follows the same rules as the normal pirates. This does mean he's invincible in shadow, which can be irritating if our allies distract him from chasing us into the light, but it also means that spells wreck him. They do tons of damage and Blizzard can freeze him in place. The best pattern I found is as follows: Blizzard Barbossa to halt him, then use fire before immediately freezing him again. If you want to spend the ethers, you can just keep this up for as long as you have the MP. Since I didn't want to do that, I chose to cast until just about out of MP and then, as usual, use a limit. Any of them work, though I found that Jack's bluff is a bit more consistent than Comet for high damage output here. This should take Barbossa down in about 3 cycles. Just be careful during the downtime because Barbossa does a lot of damage to Sora. Before long, Barbossa will be dealt with, and Port Royale's first visit will be complete. Agrabah's first visit was surprisingly easy compared to what I expected. The final fight in the Cave of Wonders is the only one that had me worried, but it was practically over before it began, much like the rest of them. There are a multitude of ways to go about this fight, like Aladdin's Limit, Chicken Little, or Reflect. I decided to focus on using the Shift Shot reaction command offered by the Silver Rocks, and the proper elemental spells for the other enemies. Near the end, tons of fiery globes and a few fat bandits appear, which is perfect for hitting multiple enemies at once with blizzard spells. After this is the boss, the Volcano and Blizzard Lords. They each offer their own reaction commands to exploit, which will briefly stun them. Other than that, use Fire on the Blizzard Lord and Blizzard on the Volcano Lord, and Ethers to regain MP. Super easy. For beating Agrabah, we gain access to Summon Boost to keep our summons out for longer, and the Lamp Charm, which allows us to call upon Genie for help, which we won't do. At this point, we gain access to 2 options. We can go to Twilight Town again, or Halloweentown. I figured Halloweentown would be a pain, so I went there first to get it over with. This world is pretty standard until we get to Curly Hill. Prison Keeper gave me a ton of trouble on level 1, but it actually becomes significantly easier if you spend most of your time evading. Trying to use Keyblade combos actually makes getting hit much more likely here. This boss will take turns devouring one of the 3 kids, Lock, Shock, and Barrel. Barrel is the most dangerous since it means Prison Keeper will focus on physical attacks. Shock can actually hit you a lot easier since Prison Keeper starts spinning and shooting tons of dark orbs from its fingertips, but this does much less damage than the physical attacks, and we can use the collision of the hail as cover. Lock is the most advantageous for us by far though, since he causes Prison Keeper to do nothing but throw giant fire orbs at us. Orbs that we can reflect using block to damage him. Simply stay away from Prison Keeper, use single blizzard spells whenever we have MP, reflect the fire orbs, and focus mostly on not getting hit. Eventually, Prison Keeper will eat all 3 children, but at least for me, it mostly just spammed physical attacks and fire orbs from then on. The battle takes a bit, but we're almost never actually in danger of getting hit. Finally, we have the fight with Oogie Boogie. This one was the most challenging of the bunch. Avoiding the first attack is simple with Quick Run. The real challenge is not getting hit by the enemies he'll occasionally summon. Still, if we just switch to another conveyor belt, we're good. I'm not sure if that causes the enemies to despawn if you wait long enough, or if they hit the spikes at the rear of the belts and die, but regardless, the enemies seemed to disappear after about 10 seconds away from them. Play it safe, don't try to defeat the mob enemies, and then all we have to do is simply get presents into Oogie Boogie's elevator whenever we can. Every 12 presents will cause him to come crashing down. Oogie is then permanently staggered until we do a set amount of damage to him. Repeat 3 times, with an easy-to-avoid lightning attack thrown in near the end, and we've beat Halloweentown. For doing so, we get the useful but extremely expensive Magnet spell. It's at this point that I decided to get Twilight Town over with. There's only one fight here, but it introduces the Berserker Nobodies, which as far as I can tell can only be easily knocked away from their swords using Keyblade finishers. This means we cannot use the reaction command tied to them. A shame since they hit like a fleet of trucks, and some of their attacks come fast. Chicken Little actually gets in the way in this fight since he's unpredictable, so instead play it smart. The first wave is just a bunch of dusks. Goofy Tornado often keeps them all close so that we can spam fire, but better luck, we'll see Goofy and Donald doing very little. The dusks will quickly surround us, at which point we can wait for one to attack, use Reflect, which costs less than fire, and deal massive damage. The second wave is more dusks, and a single Berserker. If we're fast, we can get between the Berserker and its sword to use Reflect. Once it gets to about half health, it will exclusively use its little desperation move of sorts, where it becomes tiny and starts slamming its sword everywhere, ending in an area of effect blast. Once again, just use Reflect. The final wave is 3 Berserkers. After some experimentation, I realized that simply hitting them with Blizzard when safe was an effective way to get their health low enough to cause the DM. After that, they're done for. For beating this single battle, we get Oathkeeper, which can be useful if we want the extra point in magic. However, I chose to keep on the Hidden Dragon, since the MP Rage on it stacks with the one we got earlier. MP Rage is often a decent way to get more efficient battles, since taking intentional damage will sometimes nearly fill our MP all the way back up. We also gain access to Limit Form. This is what I was referring to in the beginning when I said it was difficult to word the rule related to how we can use drive forms. Technically, you can level Limit Form without pressing X or square to attack, and without hitting enemies with your Keyblade. You see, Limit Form actually gains an experience by using the finishers of the limits it has. It doesn't matter whether you hit an enemy, though you do have to be in combat to use the limits. This means you can technically spawn enemies, run away, and then use the limit on absolutely nothing. This will still give you the experience, but you're not actually hitting anything with your Keyblade. It took me quite a lot of thought to decide whether this should be against the rules or not. I even ended up leveling Limit Form twice this way, but ultimately I decided it is against the rules since even though they're performed differently, the only thing Limit Form does is Keyblade combos. I think Quick Run should be enough anyway. Hopefully we won't need Dodge Roll, though it is indeed a useful alternative. Pride Lands is a scary one at first glance. Since we lose access to every limit outside of Simba's, we can't block, we can't use drive forms, and we can't use summons. Spells also don't seem to have finishers here either. Luckily, this visit goes easy on us. That doesn't mean the fights aren't dangerous, mind you. The first fight may only be against 2 living bones, but they can easily stunlock us to death in under a second with their spinning attack. Keeping them distracted is our best option. We can use Magnet, then spam other spells, Reflect, or if you're lucky like me, Goofy will use Goofy Tornado to stunlock them. Interestingly, we don't have any more forced fights until we get to the end. At that point we have a fight with Shenzi, Banzai, and Ed while keeping Pumbaa safe. I tried to use the speedrun strat here since it's one of the few strats I remember. In this strategy, you effectively trick the AI of the 3 hyenas into attacking you in a synchronized manner, at which point you reflect. They take damage, and they retaliate by doing the exact same thing. It kind of worked for me at points, but by the end I had to instead rely on the iframes Pumbaa gets when you tell him to follow you with his reaction command. The attacks of the hyenas don't actually seem to be able to hit Sora when they're targeting Pumbaa, so we can just MP charge and reaction command through them until we can spam spells to finish them off. Right after this is the fight with Scar, which is really dangerous if we miss a reflect, but timing them right will lead to big damage and little effort to take the grumpy lion down. This world gives us access to the Circle of Life Keyblade, which offers MP Haste as an ability. Worth keeping in mind if we ever have to rely on MP charge instead of Ethers in the future, but for now the Hidden Dragon is still a better option. And some people think this Keyblade is useless. Space Paranoids is another short one, with 4 minigames and a single boss fight being required across the entire first visit. The third minigame we run across is the Light Cycle, which luckily isn't made more difficult by the fact that we can't use the attack command. Still, it's just difficult for me in general. As such, it took a few tries. Somewhere in here we gain access to both Stitch outside of the computer and Master Form. Stitch is a powerhouse for this sort of challenge. We'll touch on Master Form a bit later. Finally, we have the challenge where you have to defeat enemies to gain orbs, so you can freeze the 3 monitors. These Heartless do little damage, so missing Reflex isn't too bad, so we spam away. And then we get to the boss, Hostile Program. This boss can kill us pretty easily, but now that Tron has his powers back, we have access to his limit, his setup. I found that Tron and Donald are pretty competent here, and will usually get enough orbs out of Hostile Program by themselves so that we can trigger the freeze reaction command. This freezes the boss until the gauge runs out. We use all of our MP on thunder attacks until we're about to run out, then we use setup. This will provide immunity to damage for quite a while, do a large chunk of damage to the boss, and nearly always make him drop enough orbs to be frozen again. Use an Ether to skip through most of MP charge, wait until our MP is just about back up, then freeze Hostile Program and repeat. It gets a little tougher near the end as the boss starts moving faster and faster and uses more dangerous attacks, but by focusing on collecting orbs, it wasn't too hard. The only thing we get here that we can use is the Photon Debugger Keyblade, which offers a 20% boost to thunder damage. We don't use it.